A flight attendant blocks a little black girl with a disability from passing through the aisle. Seconds later, the child is sobbing publicly, humiliated, scared, and confused. But what if this child wasn't just another invisible passenger? What if her mother, calm, composed, and heartbreakingly patient, wasn't about to let it slide? And what if, buried beneath polite service smiles and scripted apologies, there was a system-wide pattern of quiet discrimination? What really happened at 30,000 feet that turned a routine flight into a national headline? Why did airline staff treat a disabled girl like a burden, and who stood by, watching in silence? And how did one mother's quiet strength turn a private humiliation into a public reckoning? This is not just about one seat or one service dog. It's about dignity, visibility, and the price of being unseen. Buckle up. This flight is about to take you through heartbreak, truth, and transformation. If this story touches your heart or opens your eyes, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your voice helps us tell the stories that matter. Now, let's begin. It started like most mornings for Dr. Leona Braith, quietly calculated, calmly executed. She adjusted the collar of her slate-gray blazer and tugged once at the strap of her shoulder bag before gently resting her hand on her daughter's chair. Gate 14. Neela, she said softly. Her daughter, Neela, tilted her chin toward the overhead signs and squinted through the glare of the early morning airport lights. Her glasses had slipped slightly on her nose, and the wheels of her motorized chair clicked faintly as they rolled over the ridged carpet. I see it, Neela replied. Her voice was a soft hum, equal parts sleep and serenity. We're early. Right. Leona nodded. Early is on time. They'd arrived an hour before boarding, as always. Leona didn't like surprises, not since the accident. The world had a funny way of making things harder than necessary for people like them, and surprises had rarely been kind. But the terminal was already crowded. Business travelers in tailored suits, families juggling luggage and toddlers, couples sipping coffee while scrolling through matching itineraries. And then there was a calm, composed black woman in her 40s and her 10-year-old daughter in a rose-colored hoodie sitting in a chair that moved not with legs, but with whirring wheels and blinking lights. Leona approached the gate agent with polite firmness. Braith, 2 passengers, first class, seat 2A and 2B, requesting early boarding due to mobility. The agent, a blonde woman with tight curls and tighter lips, didn't bother looking up. You'll have to wait, she said flatly. We have pre-boarding for special assistance in about 15 minutes. Leona hesitated. Yes, that's us. The woman sighed and finally glanced at them. Her eyes scanned Nyla's chair, then flicked back to the monitor. Right, she muttered. You sure you're in the right section? Leona lifted her phone and showed the confirmation email. Unity Airlines flight UA 918, first class, Braith. Still, the woman didn't move, just checking. Sometimes people misread their tickets. Leona felt the pinch behind her eyes, not anger, not yet, just the familiar weight of being questioned in spaces they were told they belonged in only to be made to prove it, over and over again. Behind her, a businessman huffed impatiently. Can you step aside? Please, you're blocking the check-in line. Leona didn't respond. Instead, she turned to Nyla and whispered, Almost there, sweetheart. Nyla gave a small nod, but Leona could see the tension in her shoulders. Kids notice more than we admit. Minutes later, they began boarding. Leona wheeled Nyla carefully down the jet bridge. The air was dry and oddly warm, the kind of atmosphere that always made Leona feel slightly disoriented. A flight attendant was stationed just inside the door, tall, mid-40s, hair pulled back in a sharp bun, smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Name?" she asked curtly. "Dr. Leona Braith and my daughter Nyla." "Row 2. The attendant blinked. "You're in first class." "Yes." Another pause. Another scan of Nyla's chair. Then, forced cheer. "All right. Welcome aboard." Leona felt her jaw tighten. That word, all right, the way it was said, like a warning, like a boundary being reluctantly bent. As they maneuvered through the aisle, the first flashpoint happened. The chair's side brushed the armrest of an empty seat. A man already seated tall, white. Early 60s muttered, "Watch it." Leona turned, ready to apologize, but he was already glaring at Nyla. She scratched the panel. He barked to the attendant. Leona said nothing. Nyla looked down, her hands curling into her hoodie sleeves. The flight attendant, Miriam Kale. Leona saw on her name tag, sighed, and waved them forward. "Let's just get you seated," she said. They reached row 2A and 2B. Leona helped Nyla settle into her seat, folding the travel pillow gently behind her neck. She opened a pouch with her daughter's inhaler, wipes, and lavender candy rituals they both needed for peace. Miriam passed by again, this time to close an overhead bin. "Just make sure that wheelchair doesn't block the aisle," she said. Leona met her eyes. Calm, steady. "She's not blocking anything." Miriam didn't respond. Behind them, other passengers murmured, a woman in yoga pants, a man in a flight jacket. The quiet hum of judgment always made louder when it was unspoken. Leona sat down, her back straight, her breath measured, her fingers found Nyla's and squeezed once. "We're good," she said quietly. But in her chest, something coiled, not fear, not quite, something older, something sharper, a knowing. This flight would not be easy. The cabin filled steadily with passengers. Overhead bins clicked shut. Seat belts rustled. The muted chime of boarding music played from unseen speakers, a gentle piano loop, almost sterile in tone. Dr. Leona Braith leaned slightly toward the window, peeking past her daughter. Outside, the tarmac glimmered with morning sun. Planes drifted across painted lines like mechanical shadows. For a fleeting moment, there was peace. But then, "Excuse me," came Miriam Kale's voice again, firmer this time. "That device can't stay there." Leona looked up. Miriam was pointing at the small travel pouch Leona had tucked into the seat back pocket, the one with Nyla's emergency medications. "It's medical," Leona replied. "I understand," Miriam said flatly. "But FAA policy says nothing can obstruct the seat pocket." Leona blinked. "That pouch weighs less than a pound. It's not obstructing anything." Miriam folded her arms. "Ma'am, I don't make the rules." Leona stared at her for a beat longer than most people would dare. Then, slowly, with visible effort to remain composed, she pulled the pouch out and placed it on her lap. Nyla leaned toward her mother, whispering, "Do you think she's mad at us?" "No," Leona said, but her voice caught. "She's just not used to seeing people like us in these seats." Nyla didn't ask what that meant. She already understood. Meanwhile, across the aisle, a woman in a tan cardigan turned her phone sideways and began recording discreetly, but not invisible. Her eyes darted between Miriam and the Braiths, then back to her screen. The flight crew continued their pre-departure tasks, but the air had changed. You could feel it like static before lightning. The murmurs began near row 3. She was rude to them. They said first class. Right, I think she's a single mom or something. Leona heard it all. Every whispered comment wrapped in feigned neutrality. Every sideways glance. Every half-turned shoulder. In first class, silence was rarely empty. It was loaded. Miriam passed through again. This time, she stopped. not to address Leona, but to smile sweetly at the elderly white couple in 1C and 1D. "Can I get you champagne before takeoff?" The woman giggled. "Oh no, we're being good today." Miriam leaned in. "Let me know if you change your mind. We treat our first class like royalty." She didn't look back at Leona or Neela. Leona stared forward, eyes unblinking. Her heart had slowed not in calm, but in calculation. She wanted to speak. She wanted to ask if first-class royalty included little black girls with wheelchairs and $38,000 insurance devices. But she didn't. Not yet. The pilot's voice crackled overhead. "Good morning. Passengers, this is Captain Malcolm Reyes. We'll be departing shortly once final checks are complete. Flight time to San Francisco is 5 hours, 37 minutes. Miriam returned to her jump seat without looking their way. Neela shifted in her chair. Her fingers tapped nervously against the armrest. "Mom," she whispered, "why does she hate me?" Leona felt her throat close. Just for a second. "She doesn't hate you," she said quietly. "Some people fear what they don't understand, and sometimes they treat it like hate." Nyla's voice dropped. "Am I scary?" That was when Leona's breath broke, not outwardly, not visibly, but inside. Something cracked. "No, baby," she said, gently cupping her daughter's hand. "You're the bravest thing I've ever known." And that was the truth. But in row 5, another story was unfolding. A man named Reggie North, in dark jeans and a light hoodie, had been watching silently. He worked in security compliance for airlines. He hadn't said a word, but his phone was Open Notes app pulled up, and he was already typing 8:15 a.m. Miriam Kale, Unity Air FA, denies medical allowance for black disabled child. Tone abrasive. No similar enforcement for other passengers observed. He looked toward Leona and Neela, their quiet dignity, the restraint. His jaw clenched. People forget phones exist, he muttered to himself. Back at row 2, Leona gently tucked the pouch under her leg. The aircraft was beginning to taxi. She whispered again, more to herself this time. Let's see if justice has wings today. But she wasn't sure she believed it. Not yet. The wheels lifted. A slight shudder moved through the cabin as Unity Flight UA918 climbed through morning clouds. Passengers leaned into their headrests. A few scrolled silently. Others adjusted tray tables or pulled sleep masks over tired eyes. But in row 2, tension had unpacked its bags and taken a seat. "Doctor." Leona Braith adjusted the blanket over Neela's legs, careful not to disturb the pouch now wedged between her own ankles. The words from earlier still lingered in her ears like a whisper she couldn't shake. Am I scary? No 10-year-old should ever have to ask that. Leona leaned back in her seat, trying to stretch her spine without appearing uncomfortable. Her body was calm. Her mind was not. Something inside her was spiraling, not in panic, but in controlled descent. A slow drop into calculated fury. Because she knew this dance, this unspoken choreography that black women were always expected to follow. Be calm, but not cold. Be assertive, but never aggressive. Protect your child, but don't make a scene. Endure, smile, swallow, survive. She had built a life around it, around not being too much for people who were already too ready to find fault. Across the aisle, the woman in the tan cardigan was still filming. Subtle, but steady. A few rows back, Reggie North had his AirPods in but hadn't pressed play on anything. His eyes tracked the cabin crew. His thumb hovered over a recording app. He had worked in airline safety long enough to know when something was veering into policy violation territory. And Miriam Kaleshe reappeared 15 minutes after takeoff. Her smile had returned thin, pristine, false. She began distributing drink orders with a kind of performative sweetness. Coffee. Sir Sparkling Water. Ma'am, orange juice. Then she arrived at row 2. She didn't ask. She just skipped them. No eye contact. No tray. No word. She went straight to the row behind. Nyla noticed first. "Mom," she said, barely audible. "She didn't ask us?" Leona raised her hand halfway. "Excuse me." But Miriam had already moved on. Her back turned, a walking wall. Leona slowly lowered her hand. She didn't want her daughter to see her hand tremble. Neela sank into her seat. Her hoodie swallowed her chin, her voice now hollow. "I think she really does hate me." The heartbreak in her tone was surgical, precise. It found Leona's ribs and carved a space of shame and helplessness inside them. This wasn't just about a drink. This was about visibility. This was about teaching a child her presence was too much. Leona closed her eyes and thought back to the hospital corridors where she worked, to the dozens of patients who clutched her hand, grateful for her quiet wisdom. She had earned everything she carried, the degrees, the seats, the peace. Why wasn't it ever enough? The plane jolted slightly in light turbulence. A ding signaled the seatbelt light returning. Silence swept through the cabin like a curtain. Meanwhile, in row 5, Reggie finally tapped open his secure work app. He typed fast, "Observation log, Unity, UA 9 Waitit, approx. 35 mins post-takeoff FA Kale, skipped drink service to visibly disabled minor route 2A. Mother signaled for attention. Ignored. Possible Title III ADA violation in progress. Recommend inquiry. Documenting for internal review." He hesitated, then added, "Suggest immediate DEI training reinforcement for flight staff. Implicit bias indicators present." He saved the file. Then he looked up and caught Leona's eyes. She didn't nod, neither did he. But something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, a mutual language only the marginalized ever fully learn to speak. Back in the galley, Miriam leaned over the service counter and whispered to her co-attendant, "Jenna, those two in 2A. The mom's got a real attitude. I can feel it." Jenna frowned. "They've been quiet the whole time." Miriam shrugged. Quiet like a coiled spring. Jenna didn't reply. But the phrase stuck in her head, because coiled springs don't stay still forever. In row 2, Nyla finally dozed off, headphones in, her face tucked into the crook of her arm. Leona stared straight ahead, her body still. But her mind wasn't sleeping. It was planning, because she knew how this worked. You let it slide, and it becomes a slope. But this time, she had a daughter watching. She couldn't let it slide. 42 minutes into the flight, the hum of the engines had leveled into a gentle, low vibration, the kind that made sleep possible, at least for those without something festering inside their chest. "Doctor." Leona Braith wasn't sleeping. She sat still, one hand resting lightly on Nyla's leg. Her daughter had finally slipped into a shallow sleep, earbuds still glowing soft blue. But Leona's mind spun, not with fury, with memory. She remembered the NICU nights, the IV lines, the moment a neurologist told her Neela might never walk, might never speak clearly, might never even travel in a plane like this. And yet, here they were. After all those odds, they had made it to this seat, to this moment, and still they were being told without words that they did not belong. She clenched her fists slowly, then released. "You're a doctor," her inner voice whispered. "You know how to fight systems with systems, not with screams." But another voice rose beneath it. "So what if you do scream? Wouldn't she be worth it?" Her jaw tightened. For so long she had taught herself to rise above, to kill them with kindness, to speak only when asked, and even then, never louder than grace allowed. But something had shifted. Miriam hadn't just ignored them. She had tried to erase them, And now, Leona was asking herself a dangerous question. What would happen if I stopped being the good one? In the back galley, Miriam was sipping ginger ale, her lips pursed. She glanced at her manifest. "That woman's a doctor," she muttered. Jenna nodded from beside her. "Yeah, pediatric neurologist. It says." Miriam scoffed. "Well, she's got a funny way of showing gratitude." Jenna gave her a long look. She's been polite the entire time. Miriam didn't reply, because politeness wasn't the point. Control was, and Leona had refused to cower. That was enough to make her difficult. Meanwhile, in row 5, Reggie North closed his Notes AP and opened his email draft. To corporate compliance, unityair.com, subject possible ADA violation. Flight UA988, dear team. I'm currently on board Unity Air Flight UA988 and have observed multiple instances of potentially discriminatory behavior by flight staff directed toward a disabled black minor and her mother in row 2. I am logging these not as a passenger, but as a compliance consultant with direct experience in ADA-related training for transport industries. Recommend urgent review of passenger treatment records and any recorded service logs. Behavior appears to violate Unity's DEI policies and FAA Title III compliance. Details attached in full. Reggie North. He hit send. Then he exhaled and looked up just in time to see Miriam brushing past row 2 again, this time bumping the armrest hard enough to jostle Neela's hand. The child woke with a soft gasp. Miriam kept walking. "Enough," Leona whispered, eyes sharp. She rang the call button. The small chime felt louder than the engines. Miriam turned. Their eyes met. No more evasion. No more silence. Leona's voice was even, but firm. "You've bypassed us 3 times now. My daughter is on a medical device. Your behavior is documented. If you have a problem with us, state it. Otherwise, do your job." The words hung in the air. Rows 1 through 4 suddenly stopped chewing, typing, scrolling. Miriam's face reddened. "Excuse me. You heard me," Leona said, calm as stone. "You will not treat my child like cargo." From the other side of the aisle, the woman with the tan cardigan was now filming in plain view. Reggie stood up from his seat. "I witnessed everything," he said clearly. "If this continues, I will formally request a statement from the captain." Miriam opened her mouth, then closed it. A breath passed. Then she turned and walked briskly toward the cockpit. In the silence that followed, Nyla looked at her mother. "You're not scared?" Leona looked down, touched her cheek. "I'm always scared," she said. "But you taught me that scared people can still stand up." Nyla nodded slowly. Her fingers found her mother's hand. "Maybe I'm brave too," she whispered. Leona smiled. "You have no idea how brave." The cockpit door clicked shut behind Miriam Kale as she returned to the galley, her heels striking the floor faster than before. Her face was a porcelain mask, composed but close to cracking. In her hand, she clutched a folded note, not from the pilot, but from herself. A reminder she once wrote during training. Now buried deep in her pocket, de-escalation is better than pride. She shoved it deeper. In row 2, Leona Braith kept her eyes forward. Her breathing was slow, deliberate. The small confrontation had left her hands trembling beneath the tray table, but not from fear, from release. The pressure of always being the bigger person, the quiet mother, the respectable black woman it had cracked. Not broken, just cracked, enough to let truth leak through. Neela was still watching her. So Leona reached for her daughter's hand and squeezed. "Do you know why I said something?" she asked softly. "Because she was mean." Leona shook her head gently. because silence doesn't always keep you safe. Sometimes it just teaches people how to ignore you. Further down the aisle, Reggie North was now speaking quietly with the passenger in row 3, a retired teacher who had also witnessed the incident. "I can't believe she just walked past them," the woman whispered. "You saw it all 3 times. Reggie nodded. "I've filed a report already, but the more witnesses, the better." "I'll write a statement when we land," the teacher replied firmly. "This isn't just bad service, it's cruelty with a smile." In the back alley, Jenna, the second flight attendant, leaned in close to Miriam. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "I'm fine." Miriam snapped too quickly. Jenna hesitated, then spoke with measured calm. "Look, I know we've all had rough flights, but something feels off. That little girl, she's been polite. Her mom, too. And Reggie in row 5. He's a compliance guy. I think he's documenting everything." Miriam stiffened. "So you're taking their side now. I'm saying maybe it's time to step back before this turns into something bigger." Miriam didn't respond, but her face changed. Not to humility, to fear. Back in row 2, a new problem was quietly emerging. Neela shifted in her seat, fidgeting. Her face grew pale. She reached down to her lap belt, then whispered, "Mom, I don't feel good." Leona turned instantly. Neela's breathing was shallow. Her lips trembled. She was overheating. Leona reached under the seat and pulled out the backup cooling pouch for the device connected to Neela's back brace. The monitor on her wrist flickered yellow. She checked the numbers. Too warm, too fast. The galley was only 10 rows away, but the pouch needed immediate chilling. There was no time to wait for ice. Leona stood, holding the pouch aloft, and scanned the aisle. No flight attendant in sight. She pressed the call button again. No one came. A minute passed. Then 2. Nyla whimpered softly, folding into herself like paper crumpling. In that moment, Reggie stood up again. He moved quickly toward the galley. When he reached it, he found Jenna and Miriam behind the curtain. "She's in medical distress," he said. Jenna's eyes widened. "What? The girl in 2A? Her mom just stood up with a medical pouch. She needs immediate assistance." Miriam rolled her eyes. "It's probably dramatics. They've been trying to stir things up since boarding." Reggie's voice dropped in temperature. "That's a child. With a medical condition, you have one chance to do the right thing before this becomes federal." Silence. Jenna was the first to move. She pushed past Miriam and returned down the aisle. Reggie followed. When they reached row 2, Leona was kneeling beside her daughter, fanning her face. Jenna stepped in, took the pouch from Leona, and rushed to get ice. Miriam lingered a few rows back, staring not at the child, but at the growing number of passengers now watching. It wasn't just Leona anymore. There were eyes in rows 1, 3, 5, 6. And for the first time that flight, Miriam didn't feel like she was working. She felt like she was on trial. 10 minutes later, Neela's color returned. She sipped water slowly, wrapped in a thin blanket provided by Jenna. Leona nodded her thanks, not with warmth, but formality. Jenna crouched to Nyla's level. "I'm sorry it took us too long," she said quietly. "You deserved faster help." Nyla looked at her, then up at her mom. Leona's hand rested gently on her back. "Apologies," she said softly. "Only matter when they're followed by action." Jenna nodded. No argument. Then stood and returned to the galley, leaving Miriam alone with her own reflection in the polished metal of the drink cart. It didn't smile back. 38,000 feet above the Midwest, the cabin air had gone still, not in temperature but in mood. It was that uneasy calm before turbulence. Leona Braith could feel it. So could Reggie in row 5. And so could the woman in 3C who hadn't touched her ginger ale in 20 minutes. Something had shifted, not just in attitude, in authority. For the first time since takeoff, the power wasn't in the hands of the flight attendants. It was dispersed, floating invisibly through the rows in quiet acts of observation, support, and memory. In the cockpit, the captain turned to his first officer. "Cabin report." The FO blinked. "You mean the one where a compliance officer, a neurologist, and 3 other passengers have logged separate complaints about the same crew member?" The captain exhaled slowly. He clicked on the intercom. A chime echoed. Passengers lifted their heads. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Trenton speaking. We've been alerted to a situation involving guest experience and crew behavior. Please note that Unity Air takes every report seriously, and any violation of passenger dignity or safety is unacceptable. Our priority is the well-being of all travelers. If you feel uncomfortable or wish to file a statement, our team will be available upon landing. Thank you for flying with us." Click. Silence followed, and then a slow murmur of whispers, not loud, but potent. Passengers glanced at each other. This wasn't normal. Unity Air never made announcements like that unless something had gone very wrong. Back in the galley, Miriam Kale stared ahead, jaw tight. The captain hadn't named her, but he didn't have to. She felt it, like a spotlight on her back. The confidence that carried her through decades of flights began to crack beneath the weight of collective attention. Her world had always been tidy. She was tidy, polished. She had built her identity on her ability to control cabins. Now, the cabin controlled her. In row 2, Leona closed her eyes. The captain's announcement wasn't justice, but it was validation. And sometimes, when you fought for breath, validation is its own kind of oxygen. Neela leaned over. "Mom, did they say that because of us?" Leona smiled faintly. "Because of us, and because of people watching." In row 3, the woman in the tan cardigan, her name was Mrs. Myra Calloway, though no one had asked, took a deep breath and tapped out a text to her daughter. "Honey, remind me how to upload a video. Something important happened today." In row 6, a man who hadn't said a word, the entire flight finally reached for the notepad in the seat pocket and began to write. And in row 5, Reggie North quietly opened his compliance app and began syncing his onboard notes to the cloud. 10 minutes later, the first officer came out from the cockpit. She stopped at row 2, kneeling beside Leona. She said, "Dr. Braith." Leona tensed. "Yes, my name is First Officer Celeste Yoon. I just want to say I'm sorry for the delay, for the lack of care, for what your daughters endured." She glanced at Nyla and smiled gently. "I've requested a medical assistant meet us at the gate, and I'll personally ensure you're escorted first off the plane, with your equipment handled properly." Leona blinked, not from surprise, but from the weight of being seen. "Thank you," she whispered. When Officer Yoon stood, she turned to the rows nearby. "I understand some of you may wish to share statements about what you've observed. I'll remain in the cabin to receive them." People nodded. Some raised their hands. And for the first time, Miriam didn't speak. She stood still in the galley, listening, eyes glassy. A child's soft voice, Neela's, drifted down the aisle. "Mom, I think she's crying." It was strange, the way a cabin full of strangers could suddenly feel like a courtroom. The air wasn't louder, it was heavier. Every glance held more weight, every silence felt like testimony. Miriam Kale moved through the galley like a shadow. Her steps were no longer confident, but cautious, like she feared the floor itself might judge her. Her reflection in the silver drawer of the drink cart startled her. She looked older, not by years, but by where? She had spent her career crafting an image-crisp uniform, tight bun, practiced smile. But now she saw something else. Not poise, not power, just a woman outnumbered by truth. Inside her blazer pocket, she still carried the folded note, the one she used to read before every shift. It wasn't regulation, it wasn't for anyone else's eyes. It was something she had scribbled after a night of turbulence, years ago, when a grieving widow had sobbed into her shoulder midair. You're not here to control people. You're here to carry them. She had forgotten about that note. Now it burned against her chest. In row 2, Leona Braith was focused on Nyla again, checking her temperature with gentle fingertips. You're okay, baby, she whispered. I'm just tired. Nyla murmured. Leona kissed the top of her head. You're allowed to be tired. I'll carry the rest. The irony didn't escape her. That was what mothers did, what women did. They carried weight that wasn't always visible. Expectations, prejudice, quiet fears, all packed into their handbags like essentials. And yet, they stood up. They spoke. Because silence, Leona knew, was no longer an option. In row 5, Reggie North received a quiet text from his team. Incident log received. Confirm if pilot acknowledged in-air discrimination protocol. He typed back, yes. Intercom announcement made. Formal action, pending. Then, a second thought. He added, passenger Dr. Leona Braith, former military physician, calm but assertive. Daughter has spinal disability, targeted. The reply came quickly. Understood. If you speak to the press, use initials only. Reggie smiled to himself. This wasn't just a compliance issue anymore. It was a signal, near the cockpit. First Officer Celeste Yoon leaned against the bulkhead, watching. She'd served 6 years in the Air National Guard before joining Unity Air. She had flown in war zones, but she'd never seen this kind of battlefield. She glanced toward the galley and noticed Jenna, the junior attendant, hesitating with a tray. Celeste approached quietly. You okay? Jenna looked torn. I am. But Miriam's unraveling. She won't admit it, but she knows. I found her rereading that little note she always carries. I think she's breaking. Celeste nodded slowly. Sometimes, she said, you have to break to change shape. Back in the galley, Miriam finally unfolded the note. Her hands shook. The corners were worn, the ink smudged. She reread the words over and over. Then, in a breath barely louder than a whisper, she said aloud, You're here to carry them. And just like that, her shoulders dropped. She stepped out from behind the curtain, walked slowly toward row 2, and stopped. Passengers turned to look. A few phones rose discreetly. Nyla saw her first, her eyes widened, unsure whether to brace or relax. Leona instinctively shifted forward protector mode, but Miriam knelt. Not a showy kneel, not exaggerated, just lower, eye level with a little girl who had every reason not to look back. I'm sorry, Miriam said, her voice cracking for the first time all flight, not just for earlier. For every time someone like me made you feel small, you aren't. Nyla said nothing, but her mother spoke. What will you do? Next. Miriam looked up. That depends on whether you'll let me carry something too. There was no applause, no sudden forgiveness, just silence. A kind that meant something had shifted. Descent began. That slow, quiet dip in altitude that no one really talks about, but everyone feels. Phones lit up, seat belts clicked, and all across Unity Air Flight 227, something unspoken passed between passengers like the final scene of a play just before the curtain drops. This wasn't just about a landing. It was about how things would be remembered once the wheels hit tarmac. In row 2, Dr. Leona Braith pulled her coat from the overhead bin and folded it across her lap. Neela leaned into her shoulder. She wasn't asleep, just still. Stillness, Leona thought, could mean many things. Exhaustion, processing, protection. The girl had endured more in 2 hours than most passengers would admit to in 2 years. And now, as the engine hum softened, Leona looked down and whispered, "We made it through the sky. Now, let's make it through the ground." Neela gave a tiny nod. 2 rows back. Reggie North closed his notes app and removed something from his bag, a small leather folder. Inside his Department of Transportation identification, a list of aviation passenger rights, and one carefully typed letter, "In-flight discrimination incident. Formal inquiry request." He always carried a few copies, but this one was different. It had Leona Braith's name at the top. He folded it, slipped it in his back pocket. He'd hand it off in person. Not because protocol demanded it, but because dignity did. Near the galley, First Officer Celeste Yoon gave one final sweep of the cabin before re-entering the cockpit. As she passed Jenna, she murmured, "You did good." Jenna blinked. "But I didn't do anything." Celeste paused. "Exactly. Sometimes restraint speaks louder than orders. Sometimes silence protects." And then there was Miriam Cale, back at the forward jump seat, her hands clasped, eyes dry now, but red. She had expected retaliation, rage, embarrassment, but what followed her apology was something worse. Witnessing her own silence. For years, she had been so sure she was the one helping. She'd enforced rules, kept cabins clean, kept passengers in line, but she hadn't kept people safe. Now, every clink of the beverage cart sounded like a gavel. Final descent announcement came on. "Cabin crew, prepare for arrival." The plane tilted slightly. A low rumble grew louder beneath the floor. The moment was near. As they touched down, the jolt didn't feel like landing. It felt like judgment. People didn't clap, they didn't cheer, they just waited. The seatbelt sign dinged off, but no one moved. Then, the pilot's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Medical staff will be assisting a passenger. Law enforcement and Unity Air representatives will be boarding shortly." Gasps, whispers, eyes darted toward row 2. Leona sat motionless, but Nyla smiled faintly. "They're not coming for me, are they?" Leona chuckled under her breath. "No, baby, not this time." The door opened. 2 airport security officers stepped in, followed by a stern-looking woman with a Unity Air badge and tablet. And behind her, someone else, a young black woman in business attire with a press badge around her neck. She scanned the rows, made eye contact with Reggie, then Leona. Then she stepped into the aisle and took out her phone. Passengers began to rise, slowly, gathering bags. But all eyes drifted forward. The press was here. So was legal. So were the consequences. And tucked in Reggie's back pocket was a formal complaint that would soon have names, signatures, and footage to support it. But even before that, truth had already landed. The cabin lights were still dimmed, but the atmosphere blinding. You could feel it in the way people clutched their phones, in the stiffness of shoulders, the dart of glances. No one wanted to move first. No one wanted to miss what would come next. Row 2 remained the quiet center of the storm. Leona didn't blink. She didn't flinch. Her hand remained gently draped over Neela's, whose eyes had lost the wide tension of earlier. There was still fatigue there, but also a knowing, not safety, but awareness. The Unity Air representative, a woman in a navy blazer and digital badge blinking against her chest, moved carefully up the aisle. Her nameplate read, Marisa Trent, Senior Ops Liaison. Behind her walked the reporter, Tasha Elridge, an independent journalist whose beat was civil rights and transportation policy. Reggie North stood up halfway and made eye contact with Marisa. She stopped and nodded. He handed her the folded complaint form from his back pocket. Pre-drafted. Includes time codes, witnesses, flight and seat details, Reggie said, calm but unwavering. Marisa glanced down and murmured, "Efficient." "Accurate," Reggie corrected. Tasha didn't wait for introductions. She walked past Miriam, who shrank slightly against the jump seat wall, and stopped in front of row 2. "Dr. Braith?" she asked quietly. Leona tilted her head. "Yes. I'm not here for a story. I'm here because someone forwarded me a clip anonymously. A clip that's already trending." Leona inhaled slowly. "What clip?" Tasha held up her phone and pressed play. The screen lit up, and Leona immediately recognized the frame. It was from earlier minutes after boarding. The camera was angled from row 4, slightly over the seat in front. You could see Miriam standing tall and firm. You could hear her tone flat, dismissive, and then you could see Nyla, curled, trembling, trying to shift her body but physically unable to move on her own. And then you heard the words, "Ma'am, she's blocking the aisle. You need to control your daughter or exit the aircraft." And just like that, even through grainy footage, it was there. Undeniable. Unforgivable. Passengers around them were craning necks now. No one tried to hide it. Phones were being unlocked. Airdrop prompts pinged across rows. The footage had spread. What had happened wasn't a rumor anymore. It was evidence. In the galley? Miriam Cale couldn't move. Her knees felt hollow. Her ears burned with an echo. She had said those words. Maybe not with hate, maybe not with intent. But does intent matter when harm is done? She swallowed and whispered to no one in particular, "That's not who I am," but it was. At least, in that moment, it was. In the jump seat, Jenna scrolled her phone and saw the clip, too. It had already hit a local news aggregator, captioned, "Black disabled child, shamed by Unity flight attendant, mom speaks out." The views were climbing by the second. Back in row 2, Tasha paused the video. "Do you want to make a statement, on or off record?" Leona met her eyes. "I don't want a headline. I want a reckoning." Tasha nodded. "That's fair." Marisa Trent approached slowly, looking shaken. "I've just been informed your clip has reached executive level. Legal will meet you at the gate. Medical, too. We'll handle disembarkation privately. Do you need anything right now?" Leona didn't hesitate. "Yes. I want every parent on this plane to know their child can exist without fear." She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just said it, like a truth, too long buried. The wheels of justice don't turn quickly. But sometimes they start spinning the moment someone hits record. The plane hissed, that familiar exhale of hydraulics and metal fatigue as the cabin door unsealed. The gate bridge connected with a dull thud. But it didn't feel like arrival. It felt like a verdict. Passengers stood but didn't crowd the aisle. There was no rush to exit, only a cautious tension. A collective awareness that something had happened here, and no one would forget it. Dr. Leona Braith remained seated in row 2, her hand gently brushing through Neela's curls. The girl leaned against her, calmer now, though the shadows beneath her eyes remained. "Ready," my star, Leona whispered. Nyla nodded. They waited. Marisa Trent, the Unity Air liaison, stepped back into the cabin with 2 airport medical staff and a private escort agent. But it wasn't just them. 3 Unity Air executives stood behind her on the jet bridge, dressed not for travel, but for damage control. Phones were already raised on the other side of the terminal window. Tasha Elridge, the journalist, moved beside them, still recording, still silent. As Reggie North stood to exit, he turned and caught Miriam Kale's eye. She looked hollow. Reggie didn't speak, but his face said it all. Silence has weight. She lowered her gaze. As Leona lifted Nyla's medical bag, Jenna, the junior flight attendant, suddenly approached from behind. Quietly, nervously, she spoke. "Dr. Braith, I should have said something earlier. I saw what happened." I froze. "I'm sorry." Leona studied her, then nodded once. "Next time, speak, even if your voice shakes." Jenna's eyes welled. She whispered, "I will." The walk to the exit was slow, not from weakness, but from deliberate grace. Passengers stepped back. Some nodded in solidarity. Some whispered, "Thank you." One woman even placed her hand over her heart. As they reached the doorway, the Unity executive, a man with steel-gray hair and a pin reading VP, Customer Experience, stepped forward. "Dr. Braith, we are deeply sorry. There will be a full investigation and statement. You'll be contacted." Leona raised a hand. Calm, measured. "Your investigation starts by listening to this child, not just the footage. Her." He blinked, nodded. Outside, in the boarding area, the world had already shifted. A cluster of press had gathered, not a mob, but enough to matter. Signs reading, "Protect disabled children. Dignity is not optional. We fly with all of us." Leona shielded Nyla gently from the flashes. Tasha stepped forward and asked one last question. "Do you want to speak on record?" Leona looked at her daughter, then at the crowd, then back at Tasha. "Not yet. Let them sit with the silence. Let them feel what we feel. And when we speak, we'll speak for everyone they tried to ignore." Back inside the cabin, Miriam finally sat. Not because she was tired, but because she had nowhere left to stand. 3 days passed, but it might as well have been 3 lifetimes. The story hadn't just made headlines, it had shattered silence. From talk shows to town halls, hashtags to hearing rooms, the footage of Nyla trembling in her seat, dismissed by a uniformed flight attendant, was now everywhere, but not as a moment, as a movement. Dr. Leona Braith hadn't said much. Not yet. She let the world rage, comment, dissect, debate. She let people feel the discomfort without interruption. And only once the noise settled into focus, she called a press conference. It was held at a modest community center, not far from the university where Leona had once taught ethics. The room was quiet, no flashy banners, no legal podiums, just folding chairs, a wooden lectern, and Leona, standing tall, wearing a simple navy suit, with Nyla beside her, in a wheelchair now, her legs still healing from the spinal condition that made aisle movement impossible. She didn't read from a script. She spoke from something deeper. 3 days ago, my daughter and I boarded Unity Air Flight 2264 to attend a pediatric neurology conference. She was excited to meet a service dog who'd been trained to support children with mobility challenges. She had packed her own notebook, her favorite pen. She looked at Nyla, who gave a shy smile. What happened instead? Was this? She was publicly shamed. Her disability was treated as an inconvenience, her race as a threat, my authority as a mother dismissed. A pause, and no one stopped it. She didn't raise her voice, but somehow it filled the room. I'm not here to cancel anyone, but I am here to confront something deeper, because this isn't about one flight. This is about how we still build systems that expect children like Nyla to shrink, just to survive. Her hand rested lightly on her daughter's shoulder. We fly with policies, procedures, training manuals. But none of those matter if the heart of your staff is not trained to see dignity. The cameras clicked, but it wasn't for spectacle. It was to witness. Let me be clear, this isn't the first time someone like Neela has been made invisible, but it will be the last time we let that invisibility go unchallenged. Reporters began to raise hands. Tasha Elridge was the first. Dr. Braith, what do you want from Unity Air apology compensation? Leona nodded slowly. I want reform. Public, accountable, lasting reform. I want disability training that centers lived experience. I want racial bias training that goes beyond surface compliance. And I want a commitment written, signed, and posted that no child will ever be told again that their body is a burden. She looked directly into the lens of one camera. And if Unity won't lead, others will. Nyla looked up at her mom. She whispered something that only Leona could hear. And Leona smiled. Also, she added, Nyla has requested they make aisle chairs a default service, not something that needs to be asked for in shame. She wants other kids to feel seen the moment they board. The room applauded, not loud, but long. Back at Unity HQ, boardrooms had already begun to shift. Executives canceled golf trips. PR teams held crisis meetings because it was clear this wasn't about damage control anymore. It was about cultural repair. The boarding gate hummed with quiet anticipation. Unity Air Flight 2271, same airline, different crew, different feel. The world had shifted since Flight 2264. This wasn't just a flight back home. It was a return through memory and a chance to reclaim what was once stolen mid-air dignity. Leona Braith held Nyla's hand as they approached the gate. A new sign caught her eye. Unity Air proudly accommodates passengers with disabilities. Need assistance boarding? We're ready. Just ask. Underneath, smaller print read, as inspired by Nyla Braith. Leona froze, then smiled. Inside the cabin, the flight attendants greeted them with calm eyes and deliberate kindness, not theatrical, not rehearsed, but real. One knelt to Neela's level. Hi there, Miss Braith. My name's Kenya. I'll be helping you today. If that's okay with you. Neela gave a small nod, then added, only if you call me Nyla. Kenya laughed gently. Deal. The boarding was smooth. No rush, no tension. Even the aisle was clear, just wide enough for the portable chair they now stocked on every Unity aircraft. Progress. Mid-flight. Leona watched the clouds blur past her window. She had tried so hard not to cry the day it happened, not because she wasn't hurt, but because she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. But here, in this moment, she allowed herself release. One tear, then another, each one, softer than silence, carving no shame, only space. Nyla dozed beside her, headphones on, drawing in her sketchbook. She was sketching airplanes now, not dragons, not stars, airplanes with ramps and wide seats, and children with walkers boarding with joy. And in the corner of one sketch, a girl, tiny but upright, giving a thumbs up to the pilot. Reggie North's face appeared on the in-flight screen. He had issued his public statement just that morning, not just an apology, but a resignation. He said, quote, "True leadership means stepping aside when your silence hurts more than your words ever helped." Back in her seat, Leona's phone buzzed. A message from Jenna, the junior attendant from the original flight. Dr. Braith, I signed up for the new sensitivity mentorship training. They let us add your name as a case study. I hope that's okay. Leona replied simply, more than okay. It's necessary. Keep going. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into Portland shortly. We want to thank you again for flying with Unity and for flying forward. As they touched down, Leona reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet. It was Nyla's original itinerary, still wrinkled from their last journey. She wrote 3 words across the top. We came back, then smiled. Not because justice was perfect, not because everything had been fixed, but because the story had become bigger than just them. And because this time they landed whole. What began as a mother and daughter boarding a plane ended with an entire airline culture being forced to look in the mirror. Nyla never raised her voice. Leona never shouted, but their quiet presence rooted in truth shook an entire system. Because this wasn't just about spilled juice or broken policies, it was about how we treat black children in public spaces, about how disability is still viewed as an inconvenience, and how far we've yet to go when empathy isn't written into the flight manual. We saw a flight attendant collapse to the cabin floor, not because she was hurt, but because the truth finally landed. We watched a child draw airplanes not as symbols of fear, but as dreams reclaimed. And we witnessed a mother's strong, still, unshaken turn pain into purpose. If this story left something in your chest, a question, a spark, a tear, then don't let it stop here. Let's keep talking about it. Let's keep fighting for spaces where everyone, every child can walk, or roll, or dream without fear of being dismissed. We have more stories coming, more truth to tell, more love, more fire. So if this meant something to you, please like, share, and subscribe. Let the algorithm know these stories matter, because they do, and because you do. We'll see you on the next flight.